Jamie Iceman Stevenson, the drug kingpin, has been jailed for 20 years over a global plot to flood Scotland with £100 million worth of cocaine.
We know that he operates at the top table of organised criminality.
It's all about ego. It's all about power. It's all about violence and threats.
He is perhaps the most prolific drug dealer in Scotland in recent years.
Those at the top level of criminality, whether they're Scottish-based or not, have those networks, and Jamie Stevenson was absolutely operating at that level.
If you were a police officer, you'd see this stuff and say it was absolute gold dust.
And then when he was released again, he went straight back into that lifestyle, and he was a globe-trotting gangster.
Jamie Stevenson's criminal empire was booming in 2019, and the tentacles of his network slithering across the globe. He was living the high life in glitzy hotspots like Dubai, Spain, and even an exotic island off the coast of Abu Dhabi. It seemed like he was king of the underworld as he raked in millions from his criminal rackets.
We all know that Jamie Stevenson, throughout his criminal career, has had a taste for the high life, like many gangsters. In his previous case, he had used a lot of his money, his dirty cash, to buy expensive watches like Rolex watches and other expensive goods as a way to launder his money. And obviously after his previous conviction, then when he was released again, he went straight back into that lifestyle. He had a globe-trotting lifestyle, and he enjoyed time in places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi, where he spent time on a luxury island known as Nurai Island, which is popular with people with bags of cash, basically. And he also had connections in South America and close to the biggest cocaine producing countries in the world. So he spent his money lavishly, and this was very much part of his motivation.
This underworld source, whose identity we are protecting, gave an insight into the high life that Jamie Stevenson was living. The words are voiced by an actor to help protect their identity.
The likes of James White and Jamie Stevenson are driven by raw selfishness and pure greed. It's in the DNA of drug traffickers to lust after social status and material wealth. Stevenson has always had a liking for designer gear, luxury holidays, and is well known he loves his Rolex watches. White was also raking in millions to feed his taste for the lavish lifestyle, well out of reach of most ordinary Scots. And we know from their actions they'll go to the most extreme lengths to protect their millions, including the easy use of violence and intimidation. Stevenson had ordered arson attacks on rivals and even ordered a firebomb attack on his former home after it was seized by prosecutors in an effort to claw back some of his dirty cash. In the end, it's all about raking in money, and no amount seems to be enough. It was mentioned in court that Stevenson knew exactly what he was doing, and the motivation for a lifetime of crime was obvious.
His lifestyle was being funded by his connections to notorious South American drug cartels, linking cocaine-producing countries in South America to Europe and the UK. Places like Brazil, Peru, Colombia and Ecuador were increasingly attractive bolt holes to hoodlums looking to profit from the UK's seemingly insatiable appetite for white powder. Among those drawn to Brazil were Scots gangsters James the Don White and kingpin brothers James and Barry Gillespie. Rio-based journalist Harold Emmert has been reporting on crime in South America for decades and got to know perhaps the UK's best-known fugitive gangster, Ronnie Biggs, when he was on the run in Brazil.
Visited Ronnie Biggs's house, but Biggs was before the time of the computer. That's how he got in. If there was a computerized time as we have now, he would have got in. But when he was here, he was living the life we say in American, the life of Riley. But he even gave a lecture at the police academy on robberies. He even did commercials on running shoes. He says, "When you're on the run as I am. You need the best running shoes." So he attracted a certain with his sense of humor.
More recently, Harold has worked with his Scottish son, and now reporting of the extradition of Scots hood James the Don White, who was arrested in the coastal city of Fortaleza, where he had been living a Playboy lifestyle. White of Gartcosh was jailed in 2023 for orchestrating a cocaine importation plot after being hauled back to Scotland to face justice.
This is a place, any place in the world, money speaks, but here speaks higher. An average wage here is could be $100 to $200 a month, and these criminals arrive here with wads of money. And they just tip people off, and they buy apartments or flats, and they buy malls or girlfriends, and take them out of their jobs and support them. And they're able to live a high lifestyle. In James White's case and others, or he was renting a condominium apartment, a flat right in front of the most beautiful place.
His operation was very similar to the cocaine and bananas plots run by Jamie Iceman Stevenson that saw a ton of white powder brought to the UK shores from Ecuador. But rather than using fruit shipments, White and his gang hid their haul in solar panels. It emerged at the High Court in Glasgow that White had elevated himself to the top of one of Scotland's biggest mobs, following the mysterious disappearance of former bosses James and Barry Gillespie from Rutherglen, who were last seen in Brazil in 2019, amid reports that they may have come to harm.
We have something here called the Red Command, specifically in São Paulo, which are laundering drug money in various parts of the world, in various parts of Brazil. We've had stories where they even used underwater divers to hide cocaine going to Scotland and or various parts of the world. And perhaps they're afraid that another people coming from abroad may be taking over their trade. So anything is possible here, but I've been in touch with the police in Fortaleza. Nobody seems to have noted the Gillespie brothers having been there, but anything is possible.
Prior to his guilty plea, Stevenson had used a defence of incrimination and blamed four men, James White, Lloyd Cross, John Goody and Stephen Jameson, for the multi-million-pound cocaine smuggling operation.
James White had previously been convicted of his involvement in another importation plot. He was bringing drugs into the country hidden in solar panels. And during his court case, it emerged that he had been a lieutenant in a gang that was run by James and Barry Gillespie. These are two Scottish criminals who haven't been seen since 2019. It's understood that they were last seen alive in Brazil, and this is where James White was arrested. He was arrested in Brazil by Brazilian police and then extradited back to Scotland to face justice. But during his court case, we heard that James White had told associates back in Scotland that with James and Barry Gillespie being missing, he was actually going to be taking over the operation. So he essentially became the leader of the Gillespie gang. And question marks still hang over the whereabouts of the Gillespie brothers. Police Scotland we understand, fear that they may have come to harm, may even have been murdered, and that relatives of the Gillespies have been given that information by Police Scotland. But through our own investigations and speaking to authorities in Brazil, that information isn't something that's known to law enforcement in Brazil, which creates the possibility that the Gillespies aren't dead and that they could still be alive. But until their bodies are found, or until they're found alive, it just creates this mystery.
We are now on the cusp of a rapid acceleration of the spread of coronavirus. We could see a doubling of cases every few days.
Now is the time for everyone to stop non-essential contact with others and to stop all unnecessary travel. We need people to start working from home where they possibly can.
Everything was going right for Jamie Stevenson in early 2020 as he started planning his most audacious plot to date. But things were about to change as the COVID pandemic was about to hit and throw the world into chaos. A month before the first lockdown in March that year, Stevenson had sealed the deal that would see him ship 1 tonne of cocaine from Ecuador to the UK. He met with David Bilsland to discuss the plan that would involve using a Glasgow fruit market business as a front for his scheme. But unbeknown to Bilsland and Stevenson, they were being watched.
Well, the police found out that Stevenson was involved unexpectedly, because they had been given information in 2019 that a man called David Bilsland, who had no previous convictions, was worth a closer look. So they started to investigate his fruit business in Glasgow, and that led them to discover that he was travelling to Alicante in Spain. This was in February 2020. So they contacted their counterparts in Spain and asked them if they could follow David Bilsland and surveil him. It was unusual because he was only going for 1 day, and they discovered that he had no luggage. So it was a strange and suspicious activity. So the Spanish police followed Bilsland to a hotel in Alicante where he met a man for coffee. Obviously the Spanish police had no idea who this guy was, but they took pictures of the pair together and sent those pictures back to Scotland, and within seconds of receiving that picture, the police knew exactly who they were dealing with, and they were astonished to see Jamie Stevenson sitting at a table with David Bilsland. At that point, the police had no idea of the scale of the criminality that David Bilsland had got involved in. It's possible that Bilsland himself never really fully appreciated what he was getting involved in at that time. It came out in court that Bilsland claimed the moment he realised that who he was dealing with, that he didn't have the courage to back out. And I guess you could have some sympathy with that, knowing Stevenson's reputation. But Bilsland perhaps was a little bit naive, but once he stepped over the line, he couldn't step back.
Stevenson was arrested for his part in trying to flood the streets with valium, along with stepson Jerry Carbon and sidekick Paul Bowles. They set up a pill factory in Kent, which churned out 250,000 tablets an hour and was worth £14 million.
Intel led officers here to the Sherbrooke Hotel in Glasgow's south side, where Stevenson was having a meeting with some associates at a picnic table. When he clocked police officers heading towards him, he feared the worst and ran for his life. As Stevenson fled the mystery men who he thought were trying to kill him, he rolled down an embankment and ended up in a crumpled heap. But as the officers approached him and made their identities known, the criminal kingpin let out a sigh of relief. During the panic, Stevenson left his EncroChat mobile phone handset on a picnic table, and that later led investigators to show beyond all doubt that Stevenson was calling the shots using the EncroChat handles Elusive Ale and Big Tasty, tying him to a global drugs conspiracy.
Astonishingly, Stevenson was freed by English authorities and went on the run to Spain and falls off the radar. The takedown of the encrypted EncroChat network used by criminals was key to the demise of Jamie Iceman Stevenson's empire, as well as hundreds of other hoodlums operating in Scotland, the UK and Europe. The 2020 bust by Dutch and French forces saw millions of incriminating messages swept up and passed on to crime fighters, including Britain's National Crime Agency, who launched what became known as Operation Venetic.
EncroChat was a super secure smartphone system. It was based on Android handsets. Almost impossible for people to crack, either by going into the phone or by trying to eavesdrop. It costs you £1,500 to buy the handset, and that only bought you 6 months worth of subscription. If you wanted another 6 months, another £800. So not intended for the ordinary member of the public who wanted a little bit of security. The break into EncroChat was carried out by a Dutch and French team. French were in operational control. Very ingenious. Instead of trying to get into the phones directly, which has proved more or less impossible, what they did was they looked at the server, the computer that was actually running everything. They got a copy of that. They bought themselves some covert phones, worked out how everything was supposed to operate. And what they then said was, well, these phones seem to have the same sort of facility for updating and changing things that regular phones do. Let us craft an update which actually weakens the encryption so that we can download the messages and decrypt them. They've never provided any of the detail of how they've done it, but that's how it was broken. And then having broken it, the French set up a big operation, collected a lot of information from all over the world, and they then passed the results out to law enforcement people all over the world, including the National Crime Agency here in the United Kingdom. See, if you were a police officer, you'd see this stuff and say it was absolute gold dust, because once you're sort of broken a little bit into the slang, drug dealers have their own sort of slang as well. It's pretty easy to break, but you could see exactly what was happening. And you could see photographs, and a number of instances, people were showing photographs of themselves, showing them with packages of cocaine, with large quantities of money. And for a large number of investigations, not all of them, but for a large number of them, police had a relatively easy route to conviction.
And it was incriminating messages like these between Jamie Stevenson and Lloyd Cross which eventually led to their downfall. A fruit market in a Glasgow industrial estate, miles away from the sunshine and sand of Brazil. But it was here that £100 million worth of cocaine was due to be delivered and shipped across the country. But Stevenson arranged for 17 legitimate shipments of bananas to be sent as dummy runs, in case the police were onto him. However, the last shipment that was sent included a ton of cocaine hidden among boxes of bananas. And the police were watching him, and the huge drug haul was intercepted in Dover in September 2020 by the National Crime Agency, while the fruit market in Glasgow was being raided by police. This is where David Bilsland confided in a pal that he was facing a long time in jail for his part in Jamie Stevenson's cocaine banana smuggling plot. He set up a firm called Glasgow Fruit Markets Limited. One base was here, the other was based in Kennedy Street, about a mile away. But after cops raided the buildings, a refrigeration engineer who had fitted banana ripening equipment for Bilsland was concerned for his pal. Andrew Wilson gave evidence at the High Court in Glasgow and told jurors Bilsland looked like a ghost when he asked him about the raid in June 2020. He recalled visiting Bilsland a day or two later and said in his police statement, "David was looking terrible. He looked as if he had seen a ghost and was a broken man. He was normally upbeat and bubbly. I had never seen him like that. He was almost about to start crying. He told me he had done something stupid and put his hands up to it and was going to jail for a long time and that police arrested him. I can't remember exactly what it was to do with, but drugs were mentioned." In January 2022, the National Crime Agency included Stevenson as part of the 12 most wanted UK criminals across Europe. And just 2 weeks later, following an operation by the NCA, Police Scotland and the Dutch National Police, Stevenson was arrested while jogging in a street in Holland and extradited back to Scotland.
Yeah, so the police got information telling them that Stevenson was in Holland, and they, with the Dutch police, arrested him. And by chance, he had been spotted out jogging with another Scottish fugitive, Dean Ferguson. So the two of them would have been in for a shock that day when they were out on a fitness kick, essentially. And suddenly they found themselves surrounded by Dutch police and quickly taken into custody, and both were then eventually shipped back to Scotland to face justice.
Jamie Stevenson's latest trial began on August the 7th this year at the High Court in Glasgow and was expected to last around 5 weeks before a series of dramatic twists cut the process short. The first came when co-accused Lloyd Cross admitted his involvement in the plot to shipping a massive haul of cocaine from Ecuador to a fruit market in Glasgow.
But something unexpected happened on that day, where one of the accused, Lloyd Cross, changed his plea from not guilty to charge 4 on the indictment. And that was quite an astonishing turn of events that took most of us by surprise. There was one other striking detail in court after Cross pled guilty. Stevenson had stepped forward before the case called to chat to his legal team. It's impossible to know what that conversation was about, but as he turned round and walked back into the dock, he locked eyes with Cross for what seemed like a considerable length of time, a slightly uneasy moment in the courtroom. But obviously we can only speculate as to what that meant, but the question that obviously jumped out was, had Cross taken Stevenson by surprise when he entered that guilty plea? Or was Stevenson giving Cross his approval? Maybe it was part of a defence strategy. We'll never really know, but from that point onward, it meant that Stevenson had to reconsider his situation, as did the other 5 men who were still in the dock.
But after 3 days of evidence, 2 more held their hands up. Jerry Carbon and Ryan McPhee pleaded guilty to running a street valium factory as part of Stevenson's operation. Gary McIntyre walked free when he was cleared of all charges. It was a decisive moment that ended the following day when Scotland's #1 hood Stevenson finally changed his plea to guilty, along with Paul Bowes and fruit merchant David Bilsland.
Well, when the indictment first became available, we noted the name David Bilsland, and he wasn't someone who was a known criminal. Essentially, he had no previous convictions. But what we do know about David Bilsland is that he was a respected businessman for decades in Glasgow, involved in the fruit and veg business, and had many connections throughout the business community in Glasgow. So it was very strange to see a man like him sitting in the dock alongside known criminals like Jamie Stevenson and Jerry Carbon. When Bilsland was walking into court, he looked more like a lawyer, or he looked like a businessman. You wouldn't give him a second look, because you would assume that he was maybe representing someone rather than being represented himself. But in the end, he pled guilty too to being a co-conspirator in this case. He basically set up the businesses, the fake businesses, that allowed him to bring in these huge quantities of bananas that had the cocaine hidden within. It's astonishing, it really is. It's a ton of cocaine. It's hard just for ordinary people to even think what that would involve, but clearly this is a massive operation that involved Scottish gangsters, criminals having connections around the globe with some of the biggest drug cartels in the world, places like Colombia, Ecuador. They're the biggest producers of cocaine on the planet, and yet there are guys here in Glasgow who've got the connections to be able to bring that amount of narcotics into the country. It really is staggering.
So one aspect of this conviction is the recovery of almost a tonne of cocaine that was exported from Ecuador. Now, the cost of that alone and the logistics and support into that were not insignificant. But he would have to know people in South America. He would have to know people across ports of exit, ports of entry, and understand the regulatory systems in those corresponding countries. I think it shows that he was operating at the highest levels and would have been undeterred had law enforcement not brought an end to that criminal venture.
So whilst he's Scottish based, obviously the impacts have been, as you'll see from this case, across the UK, into Europe, and actually internationally as well, South America. So yes, those at the top level of criminality, whether they're Scottish based or not, have those networks. And Jamie Stevenson was absolutely operating at that level.
An underworld source revealed that as members of the gang started to plead guilty, Stevenson could see he no longer had control over them, and that led to clashes between Stevenson and stepson Jerry Carbon. The words are voiced by an actor to help protect their identity.
Jamie Stevenson isn't a man you go against without expecting severe retribution. The feeling was he wanted his co-accused to stick out the trial to keep his own options open, but once he started dropping one by one, the writing was on the wall and even he knew it. It's clear that his relationship with his firm, even his own stepson Carbon, is fractured. That could yet end up in more violence. Just because Stevenson is in jail shouldn't make anyone think he doesn't still hold a huge amount of power and influence.
Bye.